So everyone that's here, attendees, I think now is about the time to start getting back to your seats or wherever you were with your computer or cell phone or whatever you're tuning into us with, and just getting ready. Okay. So this is our session for TEK for workforce development and climate adaptation. And at the end of this, we will have a open discussion or open to a discussion for moderated community questions and answering sessions after this presentation is over. Sorry, I totally butchered that. I've been in classes all day long. But so participants, if you have questions either during the presentation or at the very end, you can put them in the Q&A box, and that's where I will go to find some questions at the very end of this. But presenters, welcome.
Hello. Hey, Tunani. Introduce yourself? Yes. Yeah. Hey, Tunanam. My name is Ali Metters Knight. I am a Mechoopda tribal member, and I am also the TEK practitioner. They call me master practitioner by tribal resolution. And I work with the community. I have for the last 20 years on outdoor education using TEK, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, and also just place-based science through the tribe.
And I'm Mel Figueroa. I am not native. I work with Ali on the Traditional Ecological Knowledge program. I'm an ecologist and the environmental policy researcher as well. So this is how we built our program. So let me share my screen. Okay. All right. So let's go into.
So what is TEK? So I'm not going to read you what I have on the screen, just to let you know. You can go ahead and read it, but I'm going to speak through it. So when traditional ecological knowledge was a term that I came up with through my tribe around 2009. And the reason why I used the term traditional ecological knowledge, TEK, is because we were trying to I was actually working on developing a workforce development within the tribe on federal forest stewardship contracting. But I wanted to have a specialized way of conserving or restoring the landscapes that were considered wild in colonial terms, but actually home and part of our ecosystem through our tribal connections. And so what I realized was there was this place-based science that came from not only folks that were gathering and doing medicine, but that it was also part of our ceremonial, practice, almost as part of our religion. And from that, I discovered that there have been periods of time for thousands of years that we've been here inhabiting this particular area where climate change has taken place, and we've learned to adapt to that climate change. So I wanted to kind of create and incorporate what we know about climate change traditionally, or just like, as it is, it's hard to say it's a tradition when it's modern too, and how it applies to modern day climate change, but that we could actually put a label on it within our tribal infrastructure so that we could separate the science from Western science.
Mm-hmm. And the terms in red here is what we're using as kind of like, actionable definitions of TEK that distinguish it from, the sort of traditions of conservation from the colonial things. So things like inhabited landscapes, people belong in ecosystems, place-based knowledge, and climate adaptive management.
So let's talk about what those climate change happen in California. When we listen to the radio song, I say radio song, Hotel California, it's on the radio all the time. There seems to be a story about, being trapped in California and kind of being seduced into landscapes or in places where it's nearly impossible to leave. But it's actually really a good analogy of what the climate change has been in California for the last 40 million years. And, human habitation's only been here for 200,000 years. But not only do we have the platonic, shiftings that happen here that are like like I said, 40 million years old. We also have extreme flooding, drought, waving temperatures between El Nino and La Nina, and just wildfires are just naturally occurring. And this is fire's home in the Sierra Nevada basin.
So where we're at in Chico, California, Mechoopda Territory, is just down the hill from where the campfire burned through Mechoopda Territory in 2018. And so the experience of being in that disaster and being in the front lines of that disaster really gave us a window into how disaster mitigation is construed now, right now, by the federal government and by government agencies. And so, you know, we've had a chance to really observe that process up close and figure out ways that tribes can intervene and a lot of where that's at is in this what's called mitigation space. So FEMA, a lot of the federal agencies are going towards mitigation, but they still don't really know what that means. And so, you know, I mean, what we would think mitigation means is, you know, how to predict those major events and to minimize that damage. But the colonial approaches today are more sort of focused on disaster response. Like that's what they know, right? They know very military style tactics. Anybody who's been in the wildfire zone will be, you know, familiar with this process, right? As soon as a disaster hits, like it becomes federal jurisdiction and there is a chain of command and very military style, right? I don't know if you want to talk about some of the things that we've seen, like the bulldozers and.
Well, yeah, I think the mitigation goes all the way up into during a disaster zone. The type of equipment that's used to mitigate disaster doesn't always, it is not even, it does more harm than good. There's more damage done by bulldozers that are, you know, what they call spaghetti lines. And that means that, you know, you'll have these huge bulldozers being deployed into areas, and they'll just if they don't have a plan that's good, they will create lines that will disaster. They've had, for instance, historical sites that actually had housing, you know, thousands of years old, and they'll just plow right through it and destroy those sites, cultural sites, sacred sites. And they don't really have they don't really have anything to keep them from doing it, because they are kind of at will to mitigate at will.
Mm-hmm. The other thing too is to understand like the amount of money that's already being spent on disaster recovery and response. You know, $2.6 billion for Paradise alone, and then a lot of this mitigation, what they're sort of construing as mitigation, is more about hoarding resources. So things like the twin tunnels, things like, you know, conserving more reservoirs and more dams to quote unquote conserve water and not looking at the watersheds. Things like, you know, reforesting after a wildfire with timber trees and not actually paying attention to what the ecosystem is supposed to be like there. And these are all places where tribes can intervene in these processes. And we've been trying to crack that nut for a few years now. But this is sort of how it works. Now, in contrast, the TEK approach to disaster mitigation, TEK actually does address disaster mitigation in many ways.
So I think because it's place-based science and there's been a history, when you're looking at California history, California is not very old. California was founded in 1851. And the first colonial contact that was really established was only as far as the 1840s. And so when you're getting into historical knowledge of place-based science, there is a myth that all the natives in California have either been removed or completely, you know, they lost all the knowledge, that it's not available anymore. But that's not the truth. There's different reasons why that's not the truth. But one of the most outstanding reasons is that we were able to know when certain events were here by scale and where to, relocate where places were impossible to live during, say, floods, earthquakes, etc. So because of modern technology and what we see in the last 180 years of infrastructure developed in California, you're actually looking at least 80% of California's population living in vulnerable areas, vulnerable to flood, vulnerable to earthquakes, vulnerable to fire, and also vulnerable to volcanoes. And so these type of things, these type of understandings of time and what goes on, has really established why the economy of seed banking, trade, understanding resources that are found specifically in the Sierra Basin that are unique to the whole entire world. This really takes an understanding undergoing not only of a tribal workforce development, but also just a large labor intensive educational institution that's able to bring people into the science of their actual place that they live and understand how to connect that to other traded routes or other places in unison with a healthy ecosystem. This was done over and over through climate change adaptation after these major disasters. This is the setup.
Mm-hmm. And of course, in pre-colonial times, there wasn't no special name for TK. It was just life, right? How people live. And but nowadays, of course, we have to adapt to the things that are in place. And community land management, what was just called life, is now today can also now be translated into workforce development. Like knowing that there's already an economy of that disaster mitigation, fuels management, there's funding, there's, it's just like the people who should have that funding to do that work just aren't. So so now we can look at that community land management, that large workforce, and turn it into jobs for tribally led workforces to do that ecosystem maintenance and active human management, as a livelihood, I guess. So that was just life before. So one of the things in terms of, say operationalizing TEK to be able to get access to public lands, to be able to get those jobs, to get workforce, is about really looking at that place-based way of life. And there's a term within the TK literature called cultural keystone species that's been really useful. The idea that the keystone species of an ecosystem are also culturally significant species to the indigenous people that live in that place. Diets, materials, and medicine and language, all of that stuff. And there are certain things obviously about the cultural resources that cannot be shared with non-natives, but there are things that can, because everybody who lives in a place needs to at least know the basics, right? At least the basic ecosystem dynamics at the keystone species. Not just the like there are certain sort of cultural things that the tribe will hold, but everybody needs to learn at least that this place that's that was the timber plantation is actually should be an oak woodland. These are things that everybody needs to know to be able to live safely in these places.
So California ancestral territories. You're going to get into, I think everyone can relate to the fact that I know exactly where I'm at right now I'm in the Mechoopda ancestral territory. Within California, there are many territories. It's very unique and different than the rest of the United States that has, acres and acres of tribal territories that are singular. But this is very populated area. So if you're in San Francisco, then you have, Loney, you have, Miwok, there's a whole bunch of tribes over there. Then you have here in this area, which is considered Maidu country. But even then, within Maidu country, we're all separated by different tribes. And so even if you say I'm in Maidu territory, well, which Maidu territory are you in? If you say I'm in Pomo territory, I'd say which Pomo tribal territory are you in? It's very dynamic in California, and it gets very interesting. When it comes to federal protection of this land, you're going to have what's called MDLs, most likely descendants, and then you're going to actually have to be working with federally recognized tribes, not just state, not and this gets really complicated and actually unfair because a lot of tribes do not have federal recognition because an oversight of Congress that did not ratify the treaties in California, because here in Chico, California, we had a gentleman or non-gentleman, I want to say we have a colonizer named John Bidwell, who decided that all of the California land was way too good for any native to have access to. So therefore, they should have no right to California. It should be all new, all white country or state. And so that's the reason why these tribes were not, these treaties were not ratified, and they're not constitutionally protected by the federal government. It took many lawsuits. We do have federal recognition in California, very few treaties, and that really gives a lot of our federal territory and actually our tribal territory into private ownership. So most all tribal territory is under private or public ownership. Very few tribes have federal trust rights over their entire tribal territory. I think Hoopa may and some other tribes, but most tribes only have a small piece of land that's in land and trust, but their territory expands way into different counties, different jurisdictions within the state of California. And this can get complicated, but when you're a tribal member, it's worth understanding and knowing. And when you're working with tribes, the more you know, the more educated you are, actually, the better off you are under adapting to the land you're in.
And so that jurisdiction is that we have to work with is not just the tribal trust lands, because there's very little of it, but the whole ancestral territory, which means that there's an agency jurisdiction over all public lands in the ancestral territory, and there's legal and federal rights to that, especially when you're in California. 19 million acres of forest is federal land. And so when you're on federal land, there's that match of tribes being able to act as federal agencies as well as a public agency as well. And so that's one way that tribes have that legal authority to be able to go into co-management of public lands in the whole ancestral territory and be able to expand that land management beyond tribal trust lands. So here are two key executive actions that has greatly sort of helped this kind of access, interagency access for tribes. Number one was the presidential memorandum. I think there was that listening session this morning about this that officially recognized Indigenous Traditional Ecological Knowledge, ITEK, as a body of science. We know for a fact that within the Forest Service and other federal agencies, there is that process right now, and we're engaged, at least on the Forest Service end, on that integration and that the protocol and the procedure by which TEK gets introduced into sort of federal agency practice. There's also that joint secretarial order number 3403 and the Departments of Interior and Agriculture, which reinforces, and officially has a commitment to fulfill the trust responsibility to tribes. And this is really important because the word co-management, something that tribes have been trying to advance for a long time, but federal agencies were scared of, got into this one. So co-management and co-stewardship of federal public lands, meaning national forests, national parks, BLM lands, as well as all waterways in California. All waterways in California are federal jurisdiction and they're federally protected. And so that also gives that federal to federal agency relationship a lot more weight now for all lands within the ancestral territory. In California, there's additional policies that also give this kind of authority to tribes. The key one is AB 52, which allows tribes to define their own guidelines for cultural resource consultation. So whereas, sort of the standard practice before has been to only consider archaeological resources, what was called stones and bones, the artifacts and remains, now can be expanded to living cultural resources, including those cultural keystone species we're talking about. SB 18 actually mandates local and state agencies to consult with tribes on cultural resources when modifying their general and open space plans. So, a lot of municipalities update their general plan every 5 years, so that they're now required to consult with tribes whenever they make modifications, especially to open space. AB 642 and SB 332 are really key pieces of legislations that were just passed that allow cultural burning. And it actually establishes an insurance fund within the state of California so that tribes and tribal and cultural practitioners can actually do cultural burns on mostly private lands and state lands. And we're working with the Forest Service and other federal agencies to see how that can fit into federal lands as well. And then AB 379, which was actually passed because of the Mechoopda's land acquisition. It actually allows local governments to enter into agreements with tribes now for co-management of California fish and wildlife lands. So these are these key state policies. So there's federal policy and there's state policy that we can leverage for the development of a workforce and the co-stewardship of public lands.
So, Traditional Ecological Stewardship Program. It's been a long time coming. This was a long time developing within the Mechoopda tribe. I will have to say that it started with my outdoor education, working with youth, up and coming college students that wanted to have access to local tribal members about plants and ecosystems. And I just realized that that was a great opportunity for the tribe to certify a workforce that if once I could get a resolution of entitlement to actually do these classes, and I have been doing them for 20 years, so it wasn't something I had to create off the cuff. I've had tons of experience teaching. So my curriculum database is really big. And so in order to utilize it for the tribe, I said, let's turn this whole database and everything that I do into a cultural resource, a protection of our living cultural resources under the tribe. And in order to do that within our territory, there's could be the future of everyone needing to get a TEK certification of some sort on keystone species, etc., in order to work on within our tribal territory for land management. That's a far shot. So that was pretty ambitious, but it really got us to build this certification workforce development program where people could actually draw down funding to pay for the certification, pay for the time when people come out. And of course, when you're actually getting training and you're doing workforce development and all that training, you're actually doing something to the land that's really good. So the benefit, there's always an in-kind benefit on that. And then additionally, I went to the tribe and said, look, this is the ultimate goal that I have. This is what I want. At the end of the day, if you want me to sit down and go, relax and watch a movie and just chill, what I will do that for is when I get a 20-year stewardship contract within our tribal territory. And what that means is getting several contracts, if not one, that allows us to have 20 plus years of actual guaranteed work with the scope of work and funding in order to execute that project within our ISWI Woodwood urban interface here in Butte County, where the campfire took place, also the bear fire. So, the certification program is about being indigenously led. It's not to have everybody who's on the workforce be Native or qualified to be Native. In fact, it's important that everybody in the community participate in workforce development. This is what tribal leadership looks like in a workforce development. It's just part of the planning and scoping and implementation. but everybody is to come and work and be involved in this. So this is actually really good for the whole community and not just for the tribal nation, but exactly for everybody.
And that's our website on the bottom here, tekchico.org, if you want to find out more. So within the tribe, this is how we've structured the program. The program is actually not under the Environmental Resources Department, but under THPO. This is important. Tribal Historic Preservation Office is what THPO stands for. And this is important because THPO actually politically and under policy has more weight to influence the scope of work on land management contracts, has a greater political power to do that than environmental. So, environmental there's only certain things that can be reviewed under that. But under THPO, all projects, all land management projects, and all environmental reviews are subject to that required tribal consultation. And so under tribal resolution, right, Ali was certified as that master TEK practitioner. That's what she was talking about with that 20 years, gives her the power to certify people and also be a consultant on living cultural resources under that AB 52 and under also in federal policy, the expanded provisions of Section 106, the Historic Preservation Act. And so, the standard THPO is still, there for the archaeological resources, and the workforce under that is cultural monitors. But there's also now this new branch of it that's for living cultural resources, and the workforce under that is a restoration workforce for many different types of contracts that can be fulfilled under that. Wildfire mitigation and fuels management, prescribed fire, cultural fire now under those state laws, forest health in general, so setting those guidelines for all agencies, watershed restoration, reforestation and revegetation, especially after the burn scars, management of cultural landscapes, and co-stewardship of public lands. You want to say anything else about that? Okay.
So introduction to TEK. So this is just a glimpse. This is just an idea. So this is 5 Munmuni, Loai, Tony, Chakawi, Lai. So these are basically keystone species: the mugwort, valley oak, gray pine, blue oak, and western redbud. When we teach this under the certification for the keystone species, we also teach this biodiversity, symbiotic relationship that they have with each other, especially like Tony and Chakawi. They're very close. They've been there. So we go back in time. We go and say, hey, they were making friends back 40 million years ago, very unique. And they made themselves adapted to this very rugged climate change that's happening in California, super droughts, super floods, everything. So they're unique. They're kind of made for this harshness of everything that's happened here. And then you go through all the other medicines, and actually the also edible plants that are edible from stem to stern, but are also basket material. So every bit of that plant is just beautiful and wonderful in every special way. And so this is part of understanding just what you get out of a TEK curriculum, keystone species. I usually concentrate on 5 per certification so it doesn't overwhelm, but we spend hours with those plants, and we have to go outdoors. We have to meet them. We have to see them in the landscape and understand them so that we always can go back to them. But it's a study. It's a study of a relationship. It's a science.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, so these 5 cultural keystone species, as well as a host of other native plants that are cultural keystone species in Mechoopda Territory, was put into a document and adopted officially by the tribal government by tribal resolution. That this list of species, and I think there's like 20 of them, I believe, in this document, are now under officially, so it's a document that says these are officially protected species, cultural resources of the tribe. And so anything that affects these species, any oaks, any riparian species, etc., are subject to tribal consultation whenever anybody, whether it's a federal agency or a state or local agency touches the land and affects these species, the tribe has to come in to be consulted.
So a certification program, I've been developing this for quite a while. So this is almost like a 15-year-old, did scooched and scratched and messed with a lot. But, phase one was about understanding the 5 levels, 25 keystone species, kind of going through meeting the ecosystems. That takes about 6 months at the least. And usually it takes a year. But we're going to say, 6 months at least to understand and meet 25 plants within the ecosystem that are considered keystone, super special, stars the show. And so then we're going to go into this phase 2. We're going to go into 25. But then we're going to learn about invasive plants, naughty plants in the ecosystem doing naughty things, and what we have to do and why we have to remove them. It's not just because we're saying, we don't like you because we're prejudiced against non-native plants up in our territory. It's not even like that. There's actually a reason for that. Most of the reason is that most of these plants have been here for 40 million years adapting to this ecosystem, and they have hosts and prey and predators. They have a whole relationship with the ecosystem. Some of these plants have only been here 100 years and no one eats them. No one takes care of them. They have no food. They're poison to this ecosystem. So it actually depletes the soil, depletes the food source, and actually creates a lot of havoc. And that's why we consider them naughty.
Invasive as a behavior.
Yeah, invasive as a behavior. We do have naturalized plants. There's mullein, there's certain things that we look at, we're like, it doesn't do that harm. Someone's eating it, someone's found it a home and starting to utilize it. And if not, if we've used it as a medicine and it's not it's not taking over, we can work with it. But all of this kind of teaches us, as we work on this land, 3 different technician and specialization skills. One is plant processing, what to do, how to make a secondary product. What am I going to do with Indian hemp or dog bane? How do we process this to be something? How do we process these acorns to make burn medicine out of the flower? How do we process these, pine nuts so that people can have this local pine nut stash? And then what are we going to do for cultural fire? Fire is a big deal. This is fire's home. We don't have a choice. Fire is going to be here whether we like it or not. We're going to have a little bit of fire, a lot of other fire. I'll go for a little bit of fire. So we're going to do it a little bit on our term. I like it that way. And then let's go to land management planning. And this is where a lot of folks that have a lot of degrees and want to have specialized work, when it's even drone piloting and, GIS and LiDAR. I mean, you're talking about everything that you really want when you're land management. This is where it goes into specialized careers. And these can also be very well-paying jobs to contractual wages.
Mm-hmm. And so, so this is all geared towards, as we said, like we've studied sort of the way that the agencies do it. And so this is the way that sort of TEK and this workforce can slide into that framework. And at, obviously doing higher quality work and with higher certification, which also means higher pay. So, at first our crew was starting out just cutting trees for like $14 an hour, $15 an hour. But with TEK certification and with all of the other, so there's the state level certifications that are recognized by the state that you need to have to work on federal lands. And then there's the TEK certification from the tribe, where they get that that specialized training on this particular place in the place-based ecosystem. With those types of certifications, we've been able to bump up the wages for our crew from $14 an hour to $33 an hour. Because each one of these certifications will add to the wages. And then and then when we get to that planning stage, where we actually get to talk about the scope of work and be able to bring in the skilled labor, right? And this is a huge change from the way that it's been done before, where, they'll get CCC or a prison crew to come and do the work, and they're like not, they're not taught about the ecosystem. Here, we've been able to basically prove to the agencies that our crew has the skill set that is needed to be able to go into a place sensitively and be able to restore it to a really healthy state, as opposed to the way that that crews are doing it now.
So seed banking, this is a big, huge deal. If there's any part of this presentation that bores you, I hope that this slide, everyone should look at. And I want to, there's somebody who asked me one time, they looked at me and they said, you mean that in every community, there's not someone saving all the seeds of all the good plants that you need to restore them with, so that if something bad happens, we'll have a seed bank to replace them? And I'm like, oh, I'm going to put some stank on it for you. I'm going to tell you that there is a company that has genetically modified seeds that owns all those. And every seed that's not and natural to the world, no one pays attention to. I mean, not really. I mean, there's no capital built on this stuff. I mean, people really spend gallons and gallons of money or gas to push acorns away with a leaf blower before they would realize to picking it up and cashing it in on something that's valuable. So the seed program is about picking up capital. So when you have an understanding of seed management within an ecosystem, you are the golden goose, because what you understand is how to flip land into money-making profits from gathering seeds. And most native seeds are super rare and very valuable, especially, and come up on this, because of disaster. So instead of disaster capitalism being something that actually hurts our economy, this is an opportunity through seed programming and through private property and public lands to create seed banks that are valuable. So say you do have a piece of land out there and you don't want it just to go to West and become some nasty, seed bank for, invasive seeds and Scotch broom. So you really want somebody to come in and make sure those are all native seeds. And then the next 2 or 3 years managing it, there's thousands of dollars worth of seeds on your property that can be cashed in on other programs that we're tied into. So it's a very good program to be able to look at that can be developed anywhere you are where there are seeds. And guess what? There's a lot of seeds everywhere. And so this is an extremely, your light should be going off in your brain right now. This should be incorporated in every program that wants to have the word sustainable adapted. So you want a sustainable program? Build a seed program.
Yeah. Seeds also, again, because especially native seeds are very valuable, and some of them are even they're priceless. They're not even on the market because they're so rare. These seeds can also, when we showed that cultural keystone species being adopted by tribal resolution, that effectively makes the seeds of those plants the intellectual property of the tribe. So, even though Monsanto did a bad by, claiming intellectual property over seeds, we can use that right now to actually protect seeds under the authority of the tribe. So, because right now, the way that reforestation and revegetation, all these things are done, that they go to a commercial nursery. And one of the things that we found out was some of the people the white men, let's say, that were running the commercial nurseries around here were going into ISWI's stewardship areas, stealing those seeds, and then selling them at a high markup to those agencies. That way, those agencies spent all of their money on these commercial seeds and didn't have money for labor. So that's when they would bring in the low, slave labor from prison to go and do the work. So we were saying, let's flip that then. If seeds are so valuable, then that seed could be used as an in-kind contribution for the tribe to partner with agencies on contracts. That way, tribal hands and native hands can go and touch the land, right? And the seeds is the sort of because with all interagency contracts, any agency has to basically pay to play with cost matching. And since tribes especially tend to be cash poor but seed rich, right? The seeds is a way for the tribes to meet that cost match and be able to enter into co-stewardship and co-management projects by providing the seeds and providing a skilled workforce that knows how to plant them, knows how to maintain those plants, and then knows how to gather those seeds. So every single one of these projects that we enter into then become living seed banks. And we write that into the contract. So that with the contract, there's at least 3 to 5 years of maintenance and also the right to gather seeds in perpetuity, because it is the intellectual property of the tribe.
And it doesn't have to be just intellectual property of the tribe. That gets to a legal situation that is just in policy, but in spirit, it actually doesn't need to be stated. Folks really do like to see the flowers keep going, or the food sources and the things get going. Just to let you know, this could be a great, if anyone is ever in the audience is writing an HMO, or, you know, has a homeowners association, these are great ideas to only native plants, only native seeds. These types of things are really good, but they actually can create capital.
And so what does it look like when we're able to leverage all of these things, the knowledge, the certification, and the tribal authority into a tribal contract for the workforce? So this is an example of a riparian restoration project that was being done actually in Paskenta Territory in Tehama County. We work with the Paskenta tribe, so their THPO kind of brought us into this project. And so this was able to be leveraged into a sole source contract. So basically non-competitive, right? Which is really important because, you know, small and emerging tribal workforces can't compete with the big corporations, but they have these particular bits of knowledge that can actually entitle tribes to sole source contracting. So this is a project where we were actually able to do the whole participation from planning and scope of work to the implementation. And so here you see kind of that the TEK program and the Cultural Resource Preservation Enterprise was the lead agency on preparing this project. And you see that the project objectives here not only incorporates what the agency wanted, but also what the tribe wanted: to protect those living cultural resources, to establish a gathering area for the tribe, and to and a living seed bank. And so this was, and we found out later that this is actually the largest riparian restoration project in California. So the Yurok tribe went into with their equipment to basically reshape the channel for salmon habitat, and then we went in with the scope of work to do the revegetation. And this, they were kind of blown away by our plan. They were like, we've never seen a plan like this before, because, you know, usually these plans are like, they maybe have 7 or 8 species. You know, they're just all kind of the same, and then they use this heavy equipment to just kind of put it all in like that, like in an orchard type planting. But we had a crew that we could really train deeply on the TEK, the behavior of the plants, the microclimates that different plants thrive in. And we came up with a vegetation plan that used 56 species, right? So biodiversity, so the role of tribes and tribally led contracts in biodiversity was a huge and very unique contribution that the agencies recognized. So we have this poster here that showed the biodiversity of the species, and also here you can, on the map, you can see kind of the extent of the project.
And I think what was really utilized here was that they had come up into a bump in the road on this restoration project that was really a window period, kind of unique. And usually history is made like that. Something goes wrong that makes something else go right. And this is what happened here. And what had happened was their restoration plan that they had and the partnerships, the people, the agencies that were interested were not interested in even soliciting or bidding on this contract, because they didn't have the supplies, the seeds available at a nursery because of fires. The fires had pretty much taken, and all the other restorations had filled up the slots of these local nurseries. And so therefore there was really, where are we going to get this turnout? And so what we were able to do through our traditional knowledge is look through some of these old growth forests and all these things surrounding this area in Sacramento, And we were able to use the DNA of the cottonwood and propagate cottonwood sticks, propagate willow sticks, all 4 kinds of willow. And we were also able to propagate mule fat, which we had to pull from Chico, which we didn't find out there, but has done great. And then we were able to put flowers and seeds and mule fat and different. So we have about an 80% success, maybe even higher, of everything that we planted, which is extremely unusual according to most of these projects. This is our first contract with them, and they thought we were outstanding. We want to have a way higher success rate, but we tell them our intention is to work on the understory, to work on that middle story, and to establish an overstory during a riparian. So this poster has the column in the middle, which is your middle inside of your riparian. The 2 columns outside are a little bit outside of that zone, just a little scooch outside. And then the other one is right on the bank, just a lot further, heading on out. So those are the zones that we planted in, and giving everyone an education about where these seeds belong, who they were symbiotic with, and how that would work with different types of soils and rocks and things.
We're getting just to the end. Yeah, I could see it's 4:45, so we'll just have a couple more, and then we can open it up for questions.
Great, thank you.
Yep, no problem. We've also been able to leverage tribal consultation to integrate TEK into forest health guidelines more generally for the county. So this is the Butte County Forest Health Guidebook. We've also been able to write TEK principles and tribal co-management into the vegetation, fuels, and management plan for the city of Chico. So that's how the TEK is able to actually decolonize colonial policy and actually write it into as guidelines for all of the agencies. Finally is cultural burning. So this is Verbena Field. So this is Ali's classroom and living seed bank for the Mechoopda. And they told us 2 weeks before this happened that we would never ever get to burn within the city of Chico. 2 weeks later, we were able to do the first cultural burn within the Chico city limits in almost 150 years.
Yeah. So tell me again, what did you say? No.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
This was a great opportunity. So this is selective. This is species selective. So this cultural burn was not what you call a broadcast burn, but we individually burned all the deer grass to get them going. So right now you see these dark clumps. It's been about 3 months, and they're big, dark green plumes of grasses right now. It almost is as if we poured super water on them, but instead we burned them. And that is such an interesting symbiotic relationship. Say symbiotic, like that's your term of the day, symbiotic. But that's the relationship between fire and some of these fire adapted plants, is that fire does them good. It takes out weevils, it fixed a bunch of stuff. It helps these oaks that are in the background get fumigated. And of course, that's good smoke. That's white smoke. That's not really bad smoke.
So this was one of the first tests of SB 332. It had just passed like a couple weeks before. So we used that state policy to be able to burn, and it made it to national news. So we found this on CNN later, but this is, actually happening around the state a lot. There's a lot more cultural burning that's able to be done because of these new policies. And then finally, just real quick before we jump to questions, it's not just the Mechoopda tribe, but all different tribes around. We have this Intertribal Stewardship Workforce Initiative, so many tribes in the area, and as well as the Washoe and other, and Pomo and Terra, the Terra program. There's a lot of tribes that are starting these workforce developments. And as Ali mentioned way back in the beginning, where there's this trade routes and this economy of seed banking and trading, this is now coming up again, but in terms of this workforce development. So there's a lot of tribes, especially in our area, that are starting to come together and work together to be able to achieve these co-management goals. And so we're really happy to be part of it. So thank you. Sorry it took most of the time, but we have a little bit of time for questions.
Yeah, and everything that you guys were saying, absolutely amazing. Thank you. I thank you again from the bottom of all of our hearts for being able to come and present to us. So those of you who are attending, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. The first one that we have says, apologies if I missed this, but does the tribe currently have a 20-year stewardship contract with the Forest Service, or is that the goal?
It is the goal, and I'm getting close. I'm meeting with the chief of all forestry, Randy Moore, in the next 3 weeks. I was able to work on the Region 5, where I was appointed as a delegate or a representative. So we're working on a strategic plan for tribes to get each tribe federally and non-federally recognized at least 10 acres of land for co-stewardship in a national forest or public land. So we're working on that, and I'm on those tables. I'm in those rooms, and I'll be talking to the chief of it's funny for me to say chief, but the very tippy top of the fire industry.
Yeah. Also
Forest industry.
with the seed bank. So the seed bank is going to be established on Forest Service land. There's a seed farm in Chico that's part of the Mendocino National Forest. So we're almost there. The document is to the tribal council and they're reviewing it right now, but about to sign the first 638 sole source contract between the tribe and the Forest Service for establishing the seed bank. And that's a resource that many tribes in this area can use to store their seeds so that they can then take it out to their areas as well.
Awesome. So Emma says, thank you so much for all this important information and the work that you're doing. What is the best way wildland fire resource advisors can support and spread awareness for this? How can we participate in the certification program, and where is a good place to start for additional resources?
So the TEK TEKChico.org is our website. We are delayed on putting some trainings out because we're working on developing a program with tribes to do cultural training for cultural burns as a collaborative, and then also to do the certification cross-culturally with the Forestry and with CAL FIRE and other agencies. So Don Hankins is who I've been working with, and I recommend working with him and looking at his legislation. So
he also has his own intertribal network.
Yeah, and so for fire, and they've got some great trainings. But I mean, not to brag, but I'm okay for a teacher. So definitely feel like it's worth it to come to Chico, go to certification programs, and I really encourage other tribes to do it. A lot of tribes are like, well, we have our own certification program. I'm like, good, let's all have one. Everybody gets to go to all the ones they like, and so that's the way we want it.
Yes, basically this program showed how we've been able to structure it within the Mechoopda tribe, but hopefully these are lessons that other tribes can also take if they want to create their own programs as well.
Okay, awesome. One last question before we say thank you so much again. We have an attendee that says your work and program is just incredible, and I'm in awe right now and so thankful for all the work that you've done to create this. I'm wondering, is the TEK certification also in other cities or towns, or is there some way organizations elsewhere can participate?
Yeah, there's a great program that the Tonga tribe in Los Angeles are putting together for their traditional ecological knowledge. So you're going to see a lot of Southern California tribes are stepping up that program. So just look them up on their website, Google them. You're going to have to do some tricky Google words, but go ahead and mess with that. But we also have that in Lake County. Pomo tribes are putting it together. And I'm going to be working with the Butte Consortium to work with them. And because their knowledge of living out in their ancestral territory is extensive, and I'm blessed to be interacting with them. But I definitely encourage people to come to Chico, look at the ecosystems that we have here. And it is setting up something called ecotourism. So if you're interested in that, this is something that we're kind of playing around with too through the TEK program.
Also, last thing I want to mention is that we also have community work days at Verbena Fields in Chico. So if you're ever in the Chico area on a Friday, our community work days are every Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. So anybody is welcome to just come in and take a look at, we have like a sort of different priorities to do every week. But that's a place where the whole community can come in and learn some of this and be able to actually help to steward a piece of land.
And we do have that poster that we did about the inner and outer of the riparian on our website under tekchico.org. Of course, it's not in poster form. We haven't got a mechanism right now. We had a bunch of posters made by Camp for Restoration. I think we got one, and we got one laminated, and we gave it up to Tehama Resource Conservation District for their office. But so we still need to get our own poster, but they did make them. So I know that the Campfire Restoration Project is selling them already made as a poster, but you can go to our website and get it, the image yourself, and use that image. Yeah, we didn't protect it like that, so everyone can use it because everyone needs to know.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys again, both so much. You have added immensely to this summit, and we are just so thankful and grateful that you had the time to be able to do this. And I think with that, I'm going to transfer over to Todd for our performance. But again, thank you so much. It's been amazing to learn from you.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here for you all. Thank you.